Okay, Numbers chapter 6 is an unusual passage that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say very few of you probably ever did a study of or had a study. This is not youth group fodder, but guess what? It ought to be. It ought to be. Before people go to a youth conference, they ought to have studied number 6. Why? Because number 6 is about a radical commitment, and some young people are going to be called to radical commitment and not know what to do with it. They're going to have all this emotional experience, and older Christians are going to write them off when God is speaking, and they don't know what to do with it. And because they don't know what to do with it, and because older Christians haven't learned it, that part of the Bible will be just left out of their experience, and they will flounder in God's great moment. What I'm trying to say to you, I'm going to cut right to the short point, is this. Many people, God has already told them what they're on the planet for. They missed it. It's not that He didn't speak. It's they didn't listen. And they didn't listen because they didn't know how to hear. They wanted to. They truly want. There are adults sitting in ministry today who wish they knew why God put them on the planet. And God told them 25 years ago. And they've never learned to interpret what they heard. I would just call to your attention that right now there are pictures of people floating through this room. But without a tuner, you can't tune in and see them. It's not that the airwaves are not there. It's that you don't have what's necessary to tune in. The Scriptures, part of their benefit is to give you a tuner to tune what God is saying. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about radical commitment. And in the next 20 minutes, I want to dissect a passage that really deals with when you get a specific call to a radical commitment for God in some area, how do you respond? First, how do you know it's Him? And second, how do you respond? And let me tell you up front, I apologize to you, but my generation will not encourage you because they largely didn't talk about it and don't know about it. God didn't fill space in number 6. He had a deliberate idea of how to give us something about a radical commitment. How many of you have read the Bible and come to the conclusion that a number of people had incredible radical commitment statements of God in their life, but that just doesn't happen anymore? I want to tell you something. There's an awful lot of people who God burned the bush and they grabbed an extinguisher. They didn't listen to take off your sandals, for the ground on which you stand is holy. They went, God, why aren't you speaking to me? I was trying to. You put the bush out. I mean this sincerely. Some of you are going to be sitting in the middle of something, you weren't planning it, and God is going to grab you and tell you, that's it. That's what I called you to. Not all of you. It may happen once in your life. It may not happen for years of your life, but this is the pattern. So number 6. What I think is interesting is that there are people who are called to radical commitment, and we're going to talk about that in the frame of a Nazarite vow. I'm not asking you to try and live this right now. I'm asking you to grab the principles of a radical commitment and then see if we can't play out how that works in your life. Go to Numbers 6, 1 and 2, and it says, Again the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of the Nazarite, to dedicate himself to the Lord, stop right there. There's 4 things I want you to pick out of those, just those 2 simple sentences. First, in radical commitment, God made the rules. He's acknowledging that a burden can come from Him, and that He can call somebody to go, I want you to tell them that when this happens, because it will. The when is a statement that God is speaking and He will speak. Because He regulates the practice, these commitments have to be done according to certain parameters. Now, some of you don't even know what a Nazarite vow is yet. Don't worry about it. Here's what you know. It's an intense vow to do something that God tells you to do. That's all you need to know about it right now. If you get lost in the technique of the Nazarite vow, you'll lose the passage. And that's what people do. They get halfway down into the passage and start talking about hair cutting and all kinds of stuff, and they lose, what is this? If God calls, tell the people, I will call some of them. That's what He said. When? Second, the person making the vow was individually led to do so. There's no discussion as to how a man or woman is called by God to a radical commitment, in which I'm going to make an assumption here. You can kick this around and decide whether or not it works for you. I think the reason he doesn't tell you how it happens is because it happens differently with different people. I think that you could be sitting, some of you, in a service, and something could be happening, or you could be sitting out on a rock reading your Bible, or you could be watching two children play in the park, and God speaks. He doesn't need a band to speak. He doesn't need a run-up to speak. So what I'm saying is, first, God gave the rules. Second, God does it individually. I know he does it. I've seen him. I've been in the room when it happened for someone. Third, the issue of the rules was to regulate, not call them to a vow. I'm saying something here. The point of the Nazarite vow was not to tell everybody they had to have one. Many of you will go years of your life and God will not speak radically into your life to say, jump on that, that's for you, go do it. It may not happen at all for many, many years. That's okay. The rules here reply to when it happens, this is how you'll know and what you do. Not you should feel badly about your spiritual life if it's not happening. That's not what this is about. So, many things will happen and you will be emotionally moved by them, but it's not a call of God. It just means you feel bad for kids who are starving in that part of the world when you see their pictures. It doesn't mean you have to give your life to it. It doesn't mean God is doing it. It's just an emotional, oh, that's really sad. Many social media things will come up and you will cry about this one and laugh about that one and move on. And it's not a great move of God. It's an emotional touch. And we all need emotional touches because God made us as emotional beings. Conversely, he does speak. And this is an issue of how to regulate it. Most of you, I hope, will never, ever go through a divorce. If you do, there are passages to regulate it. Most of you may well go through having a child. If you do, there are passages to regulate what you are to do. This is a passage to regulate when God speaks, okay? But don't walk around going, I wonder if it's today. That's not the point. The fourth thing I pick out just in these two verses is that the vow can be for personal service or giving a special offering for something. In other words, it can call you to be neder. Neder is a vow where you say, I'm going to do something. Or it can be a votive, that is something you say, I'm going to give to this. I can't go, but I can give. I love what they're doing, and God, you've really put it on my heart. This room is named after Ralph Wiley. His wife, Dartha, prayed for pygmies. Every time I ever got together with a woman, she prayed for pygmies. She sent money to Africa for the outreach to the pygmies. She never met a pygmy, ever. She said, I'll meet them in heaven. God burdened me years ago for pygmies. I pray for pygmies. I don't know any pygmies, but God put them on my heart and he won't let me go. And so she sacrificially gave over and above for special pygmy offerings. And I know that she met her first pygmy the day she died. That's when she got to see the fruit of her labor. If God seizes your heart, it doesn't mean you have to go. It might mean you have to pay. Okay? Because for everybody who goes, there's a bunch of people who have to pay. Now, take a look at 6:1 and 2 then, and the issue is that God may call a certain man or woman to a radical commitment for a burden within them for a time or for a purpose. So, this radical commitment may not go on forever. It may be for the next 2 years of your life, I want you to be involved in this. This is where I want you. This is the call of your life for this 2 years. And then you don't have it. He may call you to a people or a place. He may call you to a work and then not. It doesn't mean he's flimsy. It means he needed you there for 2 years manning your post. Look, when we call people to the military, we don't call them forever. We call them for a certain number of years. They're not less engaged in what they're doing because they're not going to be there 4 years from now. They're fully engaged. They're putting themselves on the line while they're there. And then they will be commissioned to do something else. But I also want to make sure before we get very far into this that you don't become unbalanced. You should not feel deprived if you're not being called right now. Don't feel like if you don't know what the next 2 years of your life. Here's the thing. You have to check Scripture against a vow and make sure it fits into the priorities of God as they're stated in His Word. But because God is absolutely consistent, He's not going to call you into something that's outside of the parameters of His Word. So, Clearly, you may get called or not, and you shouldn't feel bad if you do. I remember when I was a college freshman at Philadelphia College of Bible, there was a guy from Inner City Ministries that came from Chicago, and he came and he did a chapel. And in Inner City Ministries, they had these cool outreaches that were going on in the city, and they had all these, drug addicts they were reaching, and street people they were reaching, and all these things. And I was so moved by this. I'm telling you the truth. As a freshman, I wanted to quit college. I came out of that chapel and I went back to my dorm and I said, what am I doing here learning these Bible verses? I can help with them. I have skills. I can do something. I can go in there and help them. I know how to physically work on a house. I could do something. And my roommate sat down with me. He was an older roommate. He was a junior. And he sat there and he said, I want you to know that a great surgeon has a burden to make people better. But he doesn't get released to make people better till he finishes his training. And the need's going to be there when you're done. Because I have really good confidence, he said, at my age, that they're not going to fix the inner city in the next 2 years. So you don't have to worry about running out of ministry, because there's going to be lost people 2 years from now, and they're going to be in just as bad a shape or worse. So get ready. Suit up. Because going out there because you know how to run doesn't mean you know how to play the game. And you're going to need more information than you currently have. And that helped me settle down and push through it. Now, look at verse 3 for a second, because vows to the Lord aren't just emotional springboards after a stirring chapel speaker. They're to be carefully considered and planned. Look at verse 3. It says, he shall abstain from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar, whether made from wine or strong drink. Nor shall he drink any grape juice, nor eat fresh or dried grapes. All the days of the separation he shall not eat anything that is produced by the grapevine, from the seeds even to the skin. Now, some of you are going to fixate on grapes, but there's a principle behind the grapes that's bigger than the grapes. If you get caught up on the physical, you miss the spiritual, okay? Because of the radical nature of what he's about to do, first of all, it's absolutely essential that he be completely sober and clear in thinking. If he's going to make a radical commitment for God, people need to know, and he needs to know, it wasn't just a hangover. It wasn't just something unclear. If you want clarity from God, you're going to have to maintain a time, because doubt is going to creep in when the vow gets hard to pull off. And you're going to need to know that it came from God. Second, I want you to understand that everything God calls you to will put fences around some things. If you didn't hear anything else I said, make sure you got that. Everything God calls you to will put fences around some other things in your life. In other words, God won't share the boat with some things. He's going to ask you to throw over some things that were perfectly acceptable before in your life, but not now. And in truth, you're going to need to grab onto, with a radical commitment from God, there may come a sacrifice where you have to give up things that otherwise heretofore were welcome in your life. You might have to just stop doing. There are relationships in your life you may have to set aside for a period of time. Let me give you a classic example. God calls you to spend 2 years in Central America. And during those 2 years, you may have to give up your parents and your dog. I'm not being funny. You may have to give up your dog. For some of you, that may be a real thing. I have to give up my dog. I've known enough people in missions to know that people had to give up things that were dear to them. And it didn't matter if it was dear to everyone else. It mattered to them. Watching your nephew or niece grow over the next 2 years may be important to you, and you may not get to do it if you take the call. Why? Because fences go up around things when you make the radical choice to follow what God told you to do. Now, there's a flip side to that. God will add back to you manyfold the things that you give him. But do not think that when you're in the middle of the vow and it's hard to do, that you're going to feel that way. It's not going to feel that way. It's going to feel crappy on new levels. Now, the other thing is, and I picked this out when he's talking about these grapes, that apart from the vow, the normative behavior was to be able to drink wine and eat grapes, okay? So, the point is not that the practice was somehow ungodly. People pick things out of the Bible, cherry-picking what they want to see. Normally people had wine with their food. Normally people that ate grapes. Normally they had vinegar on their salad. Where do you think we got it from? We got it from ancients who figured out it was good with oil on a salad. But the point is that the abstention here was to be a symbol to you and to the people around you that God was moving you in a direction, and you needed to put some fences up that were abnormal fences. And there's nothing wrong with that. Look, your body's on loan. It's just a loaner body. It's not really yours. You've become quite used to it, and so therefore you think of it as your own, and we even speak of it as your own. It's not yours. You are not your own. Black and white. Ask the Corinthians. Paul wrote it. They know it. You are not your own. That body doesn't belong to you. So when God speaks as to what to do with it, it is perfectly reasonable. But I got to flip this over for a second, because look at verse 20 for a second. It says all the way down at verse 20. Then the priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord. It is holy for the priest, together with the breast offered by waving and the thigh offered by lifting up, and afterward the Nazarite may drink wine. I want you to notice that the abstention was for a time. Now, here's what I want to say. What he specifies to you is personal, and it can't be applied to everyone else who's in the place. I recently I dealt with a woman who God told her that she could not wear pants. Not like the pants in her family. She could not wear physical pants. She wouldn't even wear pajamas with pants. God told her dresses and skirts, that's all she could wear. I didn't have a problem with God telling her that. I had a problem that she was running around spending her energy trying to tell all the rest of the women in the world to stop wearing pants. When God calls you to a commitment, it is for you. Do not waste your time trying to get everybody else on board with your commitment. If he calls you to Central America and your heart burns for the Mosquito Indians, I love you, thank you. But if somebody next to you decides not to give, they're not less spiritual. God has something else for them. Or they're being disobedient. I don't know, but don't waste your time on that. So, I see in verses 3 and 4, they were told to abstain from drinking wine, and in verse 20, they were told they could start again. So anybody who tries to use 3 and 4 to say it's more holy not to, would you please point them to verse 20, put an arrow to verse 20 and say, if it's more holy, then the priest told them, hey, now you don't have to be holy anymore. That's not true. The normality of their life was that's what they drank. If you choose not to drink the rest of your life, I will honor that choice and think it's a good one. If you choose not to be involved in any, maybe some of you should never dance. Some of you, I've seen you dancing, you shouldn't dance. Let's just say you shouldn't. Maybe some of you shouldn't sing. I mean, honestly, some of you, there are some activities that, how many of you come from a church that had some pretty strict limits on activities? They said stuff about what you weren't supposed to do. I did. I grew up in one, we weren't allowed to go to movies. We couldn't watch TV on Sundays. I mean, you know, we had all kinds of rules. Now, here's the thing. The people that made those rules didn't do them to harm us. They did them to help us. And by the way, I've seen Christians that started off with too many rules and Christians that started with none, and can I tell you who ends up better? It's easier to lax rules than to start putting them into a life that never had any. I would rather you learn to drive, and your first time driving, you have 2 hands on the steering wheel, you're sitting upright, you're touching, you check every mirror. I would rather you start paranoid than start, because by 3 weeks in, you're not even paying attention anymore. Okay? So I'm not dissing rules. I'm simply saying be careful not to make those rules the application of holiness and spirituality in the lives of someone else. So this guy stops drinking, stops touching grapes. Why so extreme? I mean, I get the wine. Does everybody get the wine? But vinegar? Seriously, did you ever see anybody get smashed on vinegar? You have to remember that there's no way to stop it from fermenting. They don't have any refrigerators. They have no chemicals to stop it from fermenting. It will ferment. There is Tiroche. Tiroche is new wine, and it has very little alcohol content. But the thing is, Tiroche becomes wine. And so I think it's one of those, this is one of those biblical prescriptions like when God tells Saul to kill the Amalekites. I want you to kill the Amalekites. Saul, all the Amalekites, the men and the women. Saul, and the children. That would be the babies, both male and female. Saul, that would include the donkeys. That would include the camels, the sheep, the goats. That would include the servants, the male servants and the female servants. And here's the thing. As soon as you start letting a crack in, well, I did everything except, then you become Saul. Saul comes to Samuel and says, I did exactly what you said. And Samuel, the classic line, then what is the bleating of sheep on yonder hill I hear? Bah. You know, what am I here? Oh, well, I did everything except for the best of... See, if he says, don't touch a grape, don't touch a vine, don't touch a grape leaf, don't have vinegar, don't have wine, don't have... if it's absolutely rock solid. Because I've been at this a long time, and if I say to somebody, turn your homework in by noon, noon means different things to people. Well, you know, noon to 1:30-ish. And if you say, after 12:00, it's late. That's what this is. This is make it clearer than it needs to be so that it's clear. Now, take a look at verse 5, because I skipped down to verse 20. I don't want to give up the rest of the passage. All the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall pass over his head. He shall be holy until all the days are fulfilled, which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow long. Paul took one of these vows. We're going to see it later on in Scripture, where he doesn't cut his hair for the entire length of the vow. His was probably 18 months long. Now, the point is that it's supposed to so obviously dominate your life in every aspect that it affects even your daily practices, even your daily look. So that someone can look at you and go, wow, do you need a haircut? Under a vow, sorry. And that helps a couple things. First, it gives you a symbol to work alongside the spiritual truth. How many of you know that God loves symbols to go along with all of his covenants and spiritual truths? Okay, so wherever there's something spiritual going on in your life, God often puts something physical to symbolize it. That's one of the reasons I encourage you to make physical symbols for spiritual turns in the road. I really want you to do it. There's a reason why I want you to actually have a wedding, not just get married. Because something has happened in heavenly places, and it's not just a weekend in Vegas. It's something special and sacred and holy. But I would also tell you, mark other things in your life. If a great commitment comes in your life and God calls you to something, write it inside your Bible. Write it down so you can go back and see it. Write down the time and place where you were so that in your mind's eye you can go back and smell the campfire so that it's all real for you again, okay? The other thing I notice about verse 5 is that the distinct look of somebody under a vow helped other people encourage them to keep it. So you see somebody with their vow and they're going over to the buffet line and you're saying, yeah, that's the wine section. You don't want that. You want to go over there. There's the macaroni over there. And what it helps everybody else in their we need accountability from eyes other than ourselves. And this allows us to publicly put on accountability. Can I encourage you, if some of you, let's say that one of you has just from a long history of life, you just use the Lord's name in vain. It's something you do. Oh God, you do it all the time. Let me ask you to do something. Ask your roommate and 3 friends around you that are with you during the day to call you on it every time you do it. You're going to go, that gets so annoying. And then you can stop and think of how annoyed God is because you've been violating his word. Okay? And eventually, it'll curb. 5 times a day, Islam calls Muslims to prayer. When I'm in the Middle East, I just pray. I don't pray to Allah. I don't pray the prayers that they're doing, and I don't do it because of the muezzin caller. I do it because it's helpful for me to remember to stop and pray. And I figure since they're doing it, why not use it for something that is actually purposeful in my life? Sometimes the outer symbols help you. Now look at verses 6 through 8. Somebody read it nice and loud.
All the days of his separation to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead person. He shall not make himself unclean for his father or for his mother or for his brother or for his sister when they die, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation is holy to the Lord.
Okay, I'm going to push you now. I'm telling you this in advance because I need to see if you're starting to understand what we're doing. Tell me why that's there. I know I'm going to take off the table hygiene. I'm going to take off the table hygiene. Why does God say that you can't go near a dead person? Even the normal commitments and desires get subjugated to the commitment to the Lord for that time. Do you notice that the way the text calls it, it's a separation unto him for a time? It's not your whole life. It's during the time God tells you what it is. For Paul, it was 18 months during the time he was in Corinth. And it was to do something specific. And we're going to see that when we study the book of Acts. It's not for the rest of his life. He gets his hair cut and moves on with his life. This is when God comes knocking and says, for the next 2 years of your life, I want you to abstain from going to this and rather put this in your life. Let's give you an example. You're involved in a singles group at your church, and it's a great group and you love going. And God says to you, I want you to become a big brother or big sister. And it meets during that time. You have to set aside the thing you wanted to do what God called you to do for the period of time he told you to do it. And it's not because what you were doing was bad. The drinking wine wasn't wrong. It wasn't anything they were doing wrong. It wasn't like they were getting fish-knickered. It was just that they just now can't touch it. Okay? So whatever it was you were doing, stop. But here it goes a step higher. Separation to God's work for a specific time in the vow takes us out of the normal loop of life. Now, here's the thing. There are seasons in your life, and there are times when you might not want to take on the vow. Now, this is the part that we don't talk about. God may call you to do something, but you may not have a time that you have to do it right now. So God may lay it on your heart, but you have to do it after 4 years of college. Here's when you don't want to take this on. When you have a sick mom or dad that's heading toward death. Why? Because if you take this on, you can't bury them. And one of the greatest privileges of your life was to bury a parent. Because of that, if you happen to be standing at a time when you have parents that are elderly, and God says, I really want you to go to Asia as a missionary, you may put off going for 2 years knowledgeably, not disobedient to God, so that you can live out your responsibility to your parents and then go, or not. Or maybe he said, you got to do it now, and you got to be willing and know the cost of that, and explain to your parents, I will not be here when you leave this earth, but I will see you just the other side when I get there. And that has to be worked out. That's part of the reason it's in the vow. Now, go down to verses 9 through 12. Somebody nice and loud.
But if a man dies very suddenly beside him and defiles his dedicated head of hair, then he shall shave his head on that day when he becomes clean. He shall shave it on the 7th day. Then on the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the doorway of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and make atonement for him concerning his sin because of the dead person. And that same day he shall consecrate his head, and he shall dedicate to the Lord his days as a Nazarite, and shall bring a male lamb a year old for a guilt offering, but the former days will be void because of his separation was defiled.
Okay, now stop right there. This is one of the, verse 9 is one of these absurd moments in the Bible. Okay? You can't touch anything dead. If the guy next to you drops dead and falls on you, here's what to do about it. Now, what are the chances that this is going to happen? I mean, if this is common to your life, I'm moving away from where you are, okay? Because it just means, people are just, bing, there they are next to you, and all of a sudden I'm on the subway, and you're going, okay, people are just dying around me. That's weird, okay? Can we all just say it's weird? But here's what he's saying. Something may happen extraordinary that forces you to break the vow. In extreme situations, God gives a secondary way to fulfill a commitment when it has to be broken and there's nothing, because the State Department yanked you out of there because it was no longer safe for you to be there. You may not have a choice, okay? How about this one? You were called to go and teach people to plow their land. Plow snapped and broke both your legs. You're not going to be able to do it until your legs heal, but there's a way to start again. That's his point. Now, in verses 13 to 21, I want you to just write next to verses 13 to 21 technical stuff, okay? These are the technical parts of how a Nazarite vow was given. I do not want to explain that to you. Why? Because you don't have to do it. But the point is that God specified exactly how every aspect of separation and cleansing, it was all prescribed, and God did not ask men to take on the seriousness of the day without ample instruction as to what they have to do and how they have to do it. So even the technical instruction reflects something about God. Now, go down to 22 for a second. Finally, there are some unique benefits to a radical commitment to the community. God called some to a vow before him, and he asked them to make a radical commitment. He nudged their hearts with a prayer burden and a spiritual fire within. They felt it. They went out and they abandoned all their other pursuits. They followed after this, and their names may seem like a blur, but the past of Christianity has been built on names like Adoniram Judson, who was called to reach South Central Africa, or David Livingston, who was called to the dark continent that was called the white man's graveyard, or single women like Charlotte Lottie Diggs Moon or Amy Carmichael, or student volunteers like C.T. Studd, who was converted at a Moody evangelistic crusade and sent to China and India and later Africa. John R. Mott, who reached into China. Roland Bingham in the early days of the Sudan Interior Mission. And here's the thing. One writer introduced Bingham and he said this. He said, "Failure, death, and despair marked the beginnings of the Sudan Interior Mission." Here's the thing. They're still there. And here's what I want you to know. What made these people surrender their comfort and loving care to go far away? What made them do it? God's burning passion within. God spoke, and they went into it. Now, he may not call you to do something forever. So some of you are going, well, these were lifetime missionaries. There is no such thing. All of them retired. All of them. Everybody I just mentioned retired at some point. Some of them retired when they were sick in bed and then died, but all of them retired. There is no such thing as a lifetime commitment. You make the next commitment. Then you get up the next day and you make that commitment again. That's what it is. But God may call you for a time. I would call your attention to the fact that all the way through this passage it says separation for a time, separation for a time, separation for a time. Everything's done in increments. You can't think this way because you stand at an altar and you get married and they say for life. But I've been around with enough people burying the love of their life that there's a time limit on that too. Everything you do has a time limit. This side of heaven, it all has a clock ticking down on it. And so you don't want to think of things as, is this my forever career? There is no such thing as a forever career. Most of you are going to work 10 jobs in your life, and some of them you're going to like and some you're not, and some you're going to call a career, and others you're going to call a job, okay? And it's all in how you're looking at what's going on. Surrendered lives pave the road for the gospel. That's what they do. Salvation of men comes from the paved road of people who surrender their life for a time to do what God told them to do. And I love in verse 22, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and the sons, saying, thus you shall bless them, you shall say to them. Now there's a Hebrew ending that goes on. It's called the Aaronic benediction. You will give them the benediction, that's an ending of a service. Okay? If you go to a synagogue service, it sounds like this. Ivarecha Adonai v'yismerecha, Ya'er Adonai paneav alecha v'chunecha. Yaseh Adonai paneav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. And it means the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face show toward you. And the Lord be gracious to you and give to you peace. And that's at the end of many synagogue services. You'll hear that phrase, and you'll actually hear, usually it's done in Hebrew. That's the Aaronic benediction, and it comes up many times. In Scripture, it's going to come up more than one time. So put a box around 24 to 26, because that's a very special thing. Now, why is it there? Why does he call on him to give them a special benediction, a special prayer? Because we use it kind of as a general, the Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord make his face shine upon you. But this is given in a context. Why does it come right here? There's a very special blessing of God to the entire community when God is moving in your life and in your life and in your life. When God is moving in individuals and calling them to radical commitment, the power of God is being made manifest, and the entire community is being blessed by God in a unique way. It's there for a reason. Guys, let me just say this. If you become youth workers, you want to be in one meeting, one time, sometime in your youth ministry where you watch God call a kid's life. Just once you want to see it. Not the emotion of we kept you up late, sugared you badly, and now the band is playing low and you're crying. You want to see God move in their life, not sugar move in their life, not sleeplessness move in their life. And one of my big problems is that I work with enough youth things that I find that we're so busy trying to imitate it that we don't really have it. God will move when God chooses to. I am not going to try and trump you into some emotional commitment to God. I'm just going to keep hitting you with facts. That's what I'm going to do. And at some point, the Spirit of God is going to speak into your life or not. And that's not my job. Mine is to make sure that you understand what it is and what it isn't so you know how to deal with it. Okay, I want to quickly shift gears. And I just want to say radical commitment might grab your heart. And I want you to understand that you have to count the cost. And you don't have to look further than this. But by the end of life's journey, when the whole ordeal is over, in the face of the Savior standing there at the finish line going, come on, you can do it, you can make it to the end, I want you to run into Him with a smile and know that if He called you to do something, that you gave up something, you didn't give up anything. You didn't give up anything. The whole process of the Christian life is learning what you can't lose and learning what you will. Okay? And when you figure out that you tried to grab so hard onto things you can't keep, but you gave up things you can't lose, that's just dumb. Smart is the person who understands the things that they can't lose and is willing to give up the things they can't keep to get the things they can't lose. Okay? I want you to quickly flip over to chapter 15 because Numbers 5, Numbers 6, Numbers 15, Numbers 28 to 30 are the chapters of civil code. What I just said is that part of civility is that God is moving. That's what I just said. I just said that part of the civil code of law is that God is going to call some people to do radical things and we need to support them and help them and encourage them while God calls them to do it. That means some of you are going to be called to do incredible things when you leave here, and others are going to be called to help pay for the incredible thing that your roommate was called to do. Some of you are going to spend next year working and giving the money to an offering for the person who you're rooming with this year to go do something. That's not small, that's huge. Look around. You see a lot of people throwing money at people? They're not doing it. People aren't generous by nature, but if God calls you, your radical commitment might be to pay for their thing. That's pretty cool. Now, go to 15, and I want you to, as we get to 15, I want to very quickly touch what's going on here. The next stage of civility. So in chapter 5, we learned that God deals with suspicion in the hearts of a man who's suspicious about his wife. Remember? And God deals with the wife to set her free and show before God and man she is clean if she did nothing of the sort. In chapter 6, we learn that God might call a radical commitment into a life of somebody, and the rest of the community should see it and identify it and fan the flames of a passion for God. And in 15, the next step of those chapters of civil code is what I'm calling building from ashes. And it has to do with standing on the back of the greatest defeat of the children of Israel to date. Now, you're not sure about this because we haven't really worked through 14, but go to the end of 14:39, and it says this: When Moses spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people mourned greatly. In the morning, however, they rose up early and went up to the ridge of the hill country and said, Here we are, we have indeed sinned, but we will go up to the place which the Lord has promised. But Moses said, Why are you transgressing the commandment of the Lord when it will not succeed? For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned back from following the Lord, and the Lord will not be with you. But they went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country. Neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses left the camp, and the Amalekites and Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and struck them and beat them as far as Hormah. Here's what happened. In Numbers 13 is the pivotal chapter in Numbers. 13 is the spies go into the land. You all remember this? Now, Joshua and Caleb said, Go. The other spies said, No. Joshua and Caleb said, God will be with us. The other spies said, You're crazy. They're too big for us. Coming off the back of that, the people mourned. Moses went into his tent that night and people were wailing outside. You brought us to the promised land and they're all too big for us and we can't take them. And then somebody decides, I don't care. I'm going up there and fighting those people anyway. And Moses comes out and says, you can't go up and fight those people. God didn't tell us to. But he promised us the promised land, and I want mine now, and I'm sick and tired of waiting on this, and then I hate manna. I don't like manna. I don't want manna anymore. They got big grapes. We got manna. The thing you have to remember is that God told them in the beginning of the journey to go up into the land. Do you know what the 38 years was for? It was for the disobedience in the beginning. So when they were in the middle of the wilderness crying, how come we don't have enough to eat or to drink? There was plenty to eat and drink where they were supposed to be. But they weren't where they were supposed to be. When you decide not to go on God's course in your life and it feels like God's not working for you, it's because He's working where you were supposed to be. So here's the thing. They finally decided, you know what? We're sick and tired of waiting for God. We're going to go do this. Moses gets up and goes, you can't do it. You can't do it. You're going to die if you do this. If you have ever stood there at the doorway and looked at somebody and said, if you don't stop now, you're going to go off the edge, and I can't help you. If you've never been through that, this was Moses' heartbreak as a leader. This was Moses, the dad, watching the teenager walk out the door into the arms of his drug salesman. This was Moses watching, you're going to do this and it's going to destroy you, and there's nothing I can do if you won't stop. And what did they do? They went up on the hill and they got creamed. Surprise! Now we got body bags all over. It's a clear act of defiance, born out of fear and discouragement, and they let their ranks be decimated, and it crushed the spirit of the remaining people, because even the people that didn't leave the camp and stayed with Moses, they had to watch all their cousins go out there and get butchered. But God's word offered some redirection, and so 15 is not like 5 and 6. 15 is about an observance that relates to on the backside of having badly sinned and watching things get crushed. Does that make sense? So you get into Numbers 15, 1 to 21, and I want to put an encouragement principle in front of you, because right now they could use some encouragement. From the ashes of failure, God beckoned Israel to hear a word of encouragement. He wasn't finished with them in spite of their failures. They were still going to go home. Now, the people who went out and defied God, they were pretty much done. Game over for them. They're in a body bag. They're lowering them down into the grave. But the people, the parents that watched the teenager slam the door and walk out, never to come home again, God wasn't done with them. This is the people who stayed behind. Now listen to verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land where you live, which I am giving you, then make an offering by fire to the Lord, a burnt offering, sacrifice to fulfill a special vow, or a freewill offering, or in your appointed times to make a soothing aroma to the Lord from the herd or from the flock. The one who presents his offering shall present to the Lord a grain offering of 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil. And you will prepare wine for the drink offering, 1/4 of a hin, and with a burnt offering for the sacrifice for each lamb. When you keep reading, go all the way down to verse 12. According to the number that you prepare, so you shall do for everyone according to their number. Verse 13. All who are native shall do these things in this manner, in presenting an offering by fire as a soothing aroma to the Lord. When you read a commentary, most commentators are going to say this is out of place in the Bible. I don't think it is at all. I think there's an intent behind this. God's first word, now, the Lord said. Now the Lord spoke to Moses. At the point in which Moses felt like his leadership was done and people weren't following anymore, now God spoke. And what did he say? I want you to get up in front of the people who are remaining, and I want you to circle a word that's at the beginning of what he told them to say. What's the first thing he said? Get up and say this. When? When you enter the land. Not if you enter the land. When you enter. In other words, for God, The underlying assumption is, I'm not done with you yet. I know a whole bunch of people just got butchered on yonder hill out of disobedience. Guess what? You're all still going to the promised land. And when you get there, can I tell you the kind of feast I'd like you to have and the kind of offering I'd like you to give me? Because I'd like it to be exactly like this. You know what? This is, if you look closer at what God told them to do when they arrived, when they made an offering by fire, that is an ole offering, or a vow offering, or a grain offering like a shalmim, they were to do it in a certain way. In other words, it's easy to see this as a new responsibility, but what he wanted them to do is, I'm going to get you there, and when you do, you're going to make an altar to me, and when you do, I want you to remember this day. I want you to remember how bad was when you're standing there in good. What's the benefit of remembering how hard it was to do something when it's done? How many of you know easy come, easy go? Stuff you didn't have to work for, okay, I lost this, no big deal. But you save up for it, and it's a whole different deal. You put a lot into it, and it's a whole different. The reason that we stand there and celebrate when you walk down the aisle with the tassel kind of flopping back and forth is you worked for it. You did it. This was your time, your effort, your expended energy. Now, yeah, you're the one who's going to benefit from it, but we acknowledge as a people, this person did this. The reason we put a golden orb around the person on a high platform after they complete first in the Olympics is they did all the work. And he says, I want you to know there's an Olympic ceremony coming up at the end of this long, hot time. I know you just slipped on the balance beam, and I know that you feel like you're a total failure, but you're going to be a gold medalist. And when you're a gold medalist, this is how I'd like you to stand. That's what he's doing. He's tuning them in to an encouragement. And this is my point. Each of the formulas that were specified and detailed, they added something to the memorial of God's faithfulness. So he says, when you enter, offer this kind of sacrifice, put this with it, add that to it. In verse 7, for the ram, I'd like you to add a little bit of grain. I'd like you to put in a drink offering. And verses 9 and 10, for the bull, I'd like you to give me this much grain and this much. And he's giving them a specific, but the focus is not on if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. So I want you to pretend you're in the gym and you're working out a routine and it's just not working for you and it's not coming together. And your coach says, listen, I need to tell you something. When you get the gold medal, I'd like you to be wearing this around your collar. And this is how I want you to stand up for your gold medal. My gold medal, I just fell off the balance beam. I don't care. You're a gold medalist, and I'm about to get you to a gold medal. Would you please remember the day you fell off the beam, because I'm going to tell you about that day when you're standing up getting your gold medal. I'm going to remind you. You remember how you were just ready to quit and you were done? Do you see the encouragement principle here? Guys, does everybody in the room see how hard it is to see it? It's there, it's obvious, but you have to look for it. By this point in the year, my hope is that you're starting to get it. The Bible contains all these things that seem secretive and hard to unlock. It's just because it takes time to reflect on what it is he's doing. And you can't get those in little 10-minute snippets on the radio. You're going to have to marinate in these passages to understand what they're about. Let me flip down for a second to verses 14 to 16, because I want to give you an empathy principle. What is empathy? Yeah, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. That's a good way to say it. Okay, with the encouragement clearly in view, I want you to zoom in. Somebody read 14 to 16 for a second, nice and loud.
If an alien sojourns with you, or one who may be among you throughout your generations, and he wishes to make an offering by fire as a soothing aroma to the Lord, just as you do, so he shall do. As for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you and for the alien who sojourns with you, a perpetual statute throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the alien be before the Lord. There is to be one law and one ordinance for you and for the alien who sojourns with you.
Do you know what the alien laws were in Scripture? Because this is rooted, and you're going to see it again several times. You're going to see it in Numbers. You're going to see it again in Deuteronomy more than once. The law says, I have one people. If they're traveling with you and become part of you, they follow exactly the same law. That doesn't sound like empathy. It sounds like a rule, right? But wait a minute. Here's what he's trying to say. People just marched up and died on that hill. And stop looking for somebody to blame. Stop. I want you to start thinking for a minute. Some of this is, I want you to learn tenderness to the people that are in your midst, because even though it's easy to blame somebody from the outside for everything, I want you to have one sacrifice standard, one law for them. They have to join Israel if they're going to be with you. Now, there's also something else. By saying that, he's not anticipating that the world that isn't with them will become like them. So stop and understand this for a second. Believers can't expect the world to live by godly standards. What they're saying makes sense if there is no God. However, the logical conclusion of it is that all the things that make our lives in quality and civilization better and culture required sacrifice, but sacrifice doesn't come naturally. And so what happens is we're going to watch the disassembly of our society. And it's all going to be based on the fact that I'm going to do what I want to do. Why should I love a child that's in my womb when it's not going to be convenient to raise them? So I will just exterminate them. And I don't need to feel bad about that. I can make another one later, because there's no personhood if I can't see it. Because you don't exist to me when I'm on vacation. I do what I want. And what happens is we settle into a mindset that is not just anti-culture and civilization, anti-discipline, it's anti-God. The things that made our society work are things that are counterintuitive, where you give up and you sacrifice for someone else. But that requires some other payoff. Patriotism by itself doesn't make sense in a world that has no God. Why is it important that I give my life for you? Who are you? I'm not going to be here to enjoy it. Why should I get shot out there so a bunch of people can be back here protesting? Why should I do that? So what's happening is, I was out the other day with a football coach out to lunch. And he's saying, it's harder and harder to get anybody to join these things. It's harder to get them to commit to one another. Everybody wants to be a star player, but nobody wants to be a team. What's the hardest position in the orchestra to get somebody to fill? Do you know? Second fiddle. Second violin. You know why? Everybody wants to be first. And in a dog-eat-dog world, that's what you get. I think what's important is that empathy is the ability to see that somebody else who's had less than you should be included in your blessing. That's part of this. The alien law was to say, don't look at the immigrant as your problem, look at them as an opportunity to share your life with them. If what you have is so good, then share it with them. They'll get it. They'll want it. They'll do it. Stop looking at them like the enemy. The enemy is the rebellious person who just walked up the hill and defied God. That's the rebellious person. Now, there's also another one. I like the effect principle. Look at the effect principle. And it's a very long principle, but we're only going to do it very quickly. 22 to 41. And here's the thing. God didn't forget the sin that caused the devastation. He used it to instruct them about themselves. He made clear that there are different kinds of sin. In 22 to 29, just put the word next to it, omission. Individual sins of omission. Why is omission a sin and not simply a mistake? Doesn't everybody forget to do right sometimes? Yes, we do. At the same time, our rebellion often comes from neglect. See, forgetting may sound like a mistake. Neglecting sounds like an error, a sin. And what he's saying is, look at verse 22. When you unwittingly fail and do not observe all these commandments which the Lord has spoken to Moses, even all that the Lord has commanded you through Moses, from the day which the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations, then it shall be, if it is done unintentionally, without the knowledge of the congregation, that all the congregation shall offer one bull for a burnt offering. What is a burnt offering? What's the word? Ole. And what does it mean? What kind of offering is it? Dedication. This is when you realize that you have forgotten to do what I've told you to do, stop, rededicate your life. And you as a people will stop and make a point of rededication. And here's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that, by the way, this was directed at leaders. This was all directed at leaders. The you here is all to the leaders. He said, when this stuff starts happening, you have to understand that you have forgotten to teach them what it is they should have known. I am amazed. Social media is not a place to be encouraged about the level of Bible instruction in America. This past week, a church somewhere in America, I do not know them, said that the end of the world was coming. What was it, on the 7th or something like that? And I'm trying to think what it was. Yeah, it was the end of the world was yesterday. So it's obviously God didn't get the memo. But the point is that they published that was it, was going to be annihilated. And then I watched the social media blow up with, well, they can't know the end because Jesus said even he doesn't know. Then we went off and, well, then how is Jesus really God? And what I just saw was an exercise of the worst of Christian poor theology played out in front of everyone. And I was looking at this going, they don't understand the context. They didn't read the verses. They don't, other than the fact that they got it completely wrong, it was perfect. And you're sitting there going, ay, ay, ay. I'm a Bible teacher. And here's what I know. Most people don't know what they're talking about when it comes to their own faith. Am I being too hard? Most people honestly read the Bible so cut up that they might as well be reading a Reader's Digest because they're getting so little out of it that makes any sense. Listen to me. If you're listening to somebody whose main message is that Jesus came to make you happy, they don't know what the Bible's about. If you're listening to someone who says, because Jesus came, you're going to have an abundant life, and that means you're going to get wealthier, they don't know what the Bible's about. I got too many stories of people whose lives were devastated by knowing Jesus. Okay? And here's my point. This isn't all there is. And if I don't see it through the perspective of eternity, then I don't understand the whole thing that we're talking about. Remember, World 1.0, World 2.0 is inside World 1.0. World 1.0 is the spiritual world, and that's the real one, not this one. So you try to make it all about how Jesus is going to give you a better car, and you're living a 2.0 life, but you're a 1.0 liver. You got the wrong life. You're on the wrong life. You're on the wrong idea about life. I can hear it. Somebody's going to say, but Pastor Randy, how are we going to get people to follow if we don't? Jesus said it this way. You can't follow me if you won't deny yourself, take up your cross daily and follow me. If you're not ready to give your life and die, you can't follow me. That's the Jesus solution. Jesus was so anti, he could never have passed a Carnegie course. He could not have passed a course on how to win friends and influence people. Now, that's funny, isn't it? God put on human skin, but he can't influence us. Sure he can. The point is that we have designed a Christianity that is for the masses, not from God. And as long as you keep sculpting the message for what they want to hear, it's not what God wanted to say. Other than that, it's a good idea. Go down to verse 27, because he moves from verses 22 and 20 to 26 about the leaders, and he goes down to the congregation and says, you better be sensitive to walk uprightly. If a person sins unintentionally, then he shall offer a 1-year-old female goat for a sin offering. Then by the way, what makes it a chata'ah? Why is it a sin offering? Okay, the issue here is one thing. It's sin. And so it's a simple sin offering, and it's going to be a female goat. Then the priest shall make an atonement before the Lord for the person who's gone astray, when he sins unintentionally, making atonement for him that he may be forgiven. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the sons of Israel, and alien for those who sojourn among them. In other words, teach the people who come from somewhere else what it means to follow me, because the law applies to them as well. They don't get to come and be something hyphenated Hebrews. Oh, we're the Latin Hebrews. We don't do that. We're the Polish Hebrews. We don't do that. He said if they join you, they're with you, they learn it, they do it. That's it. And then at the end, he goes on and he says, look, sin is a cause that anticipates an effect. You just watched your sons and neighbors and uncles and go out there and die on a hillside in rebellion. Can I just tell you, the sin wasn't the day they rebelled. The sin was 6 months ago when they stopped walking with me. That's what he's trying to say. So Numbers 15 is about a process as it creeps forward. I want you to drop down to verse 30. We're almost done, ready for a break. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he is native or alien, that one is blaspheming the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people. He says, look, you just watch them all die. Why? Because rebels defy God's authority and they challenge my right to lead, and I will not be challenged in my right to lead. He says, I want to show you a case study. And the case study is 32 to 36. Look at the case study. Just write the words case study next to it. While the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Ah! This is like a major red alert, red alert. Man is gathering sticks on Sabbath day. Now, here's what they didn't do. They didn't go to the pundits on talk shows and talk about the unfortunate upbringing of the man who didn't learn it very well, or he's diminished capacity because he was drunk and so he shouldn't be held responsible. They didn't try to explain away he didn't have a calendar, he didn't know which day of the week it was. They weren't on the page of good reasons why he did wrong, which is exactly the page we're on in the 21st century. He says, he did it. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in custody because they had not been declared what should be done to him. They didn't yet know what the rule was. They knew that you couldn't do it, but some of you are going to be parents and you're going to say, if you don't knock that off, I am going to do something about it. And that's your way of saying, and I don't know what it is, but when I think of it, I'll let you know. So that's where they are. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man surely shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, just as the Lord commanded him. Now, before you get lost in the severity of the punishment, I want you to be careful to observe several truths about the story. First, the man had very few rules to follow in the desert. You're not talking about a guy who has 613 commandments and this incredible structure of Judaism over his life. Okay? He doesn't have to eat kosher because, honestly, he doesn't have that much to eat. Manna isn't really an issue. So the problem was one of priority of the few things he had. Listen to me. If you want to rebel and there's only one thing you can do wrong, you'll do the one thing. It's not about how many rules there are. And see, what will happen in our world is they're going to talk about, look how hard God is on them. He only had like 3 rules in his life, and he couldn't keep them. Now, come on, okay? He was told, don't sleep with a neighbor, don't steal their stuff, don't work on the Sabbath. This is not hard. Now, the second thing is that the man had 6 days to get sufficient wood, and he didn't do it. The problem was one of respect of God's person. If God didn't take his life, if he didn't respect God, what makes you think he's going to respect the property of his neighbor? The third one is that he could have planned for the wood usage, but his sin started before the violation he got caught in. In other words, his bad decisions against God didn't start the day he started picking up sticks. They had started long before that. He was using up his wood inappropriately, and he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. The problem was one of discipline and time and effort and respect of God's person and priority of God's word. All of these were the problem. So it's true that God took the violation very seriously, but he always does. At the same time, if one starts in a sober and serious reverence, the issue tends to come up less later. If you take your walk with God seriously, you're not going to be flamboyant about your rebellion. How much rebellion should we tolerate in a youth group? How much flaunting of adultery should we allow in a church service? Should we believe you when you sign for a mortgage? You can't stick with the guy when you made the promise, but you're certainly going to stick for this $100,000. Should we believe you? See, my problem is you're breaking your word in front of everybody that's important to you. And that's not a problem? Say that out loud in the service, and people who have done it will be mad at you for saying it. But they're wrong. You're not. And what happens is when crimes are left unpunished, people think they're normal. And we're horrified by some of the things we see. Consider the honesty and integrity of the people after Ananias and Sapphira went out in the body bag. You think you're going to get up and lie? How many of you think that lying went down dramatically over the next week after Ananias and Sapphira died for lying? I'm just saying, okay? Verses 37 to 41 are the remembrance ornament. What was the remembrance ornament? This is the chastity ring of the ancient world. Look at it. It says, speak to the sons of Israel, verse 38, tell them that they shall make for themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generation. Put a tassel on each of the corners with a riband of blue, and it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commands of the Lord so as to do them and not follow after your own heart or your own eyes. There is a point to a chastity ring, is what I'm saying. There is a point to a wedding ring, is what I'm saying. Sometimes you need an ornament that you slip on for the purpose of reminding you that you have an ornament on. And it is, in fact, a covenant in your life. So do the ornament or get rid of it. Some people need to take their rings off because they're not living their rings. Okay? Symbols are important. And God tells people to put symbols on their life.